Well, hello and welcome to Closing the Distance. This is the podcast of the Roswell Presbyterian Church where one of the pastors interviews the preaching pastor of the week. And so I'm Carrie Weatherford, and I am so honored to interview our senior pastor, Jeff Meyers, who preached a fabulous sermon on Sunday. Continuing our sermon series, which is based on Inside Out, the movie, but we're really pairing these emotions with Psalms. And so this week we talked about sadness, which
Yeah, lucky me.
oh, wait a second. I have preparations for our interview.
Who is truly sadness?
Who is sadness?
Oh, sadness.
So sad. I will just take any excuse I can to wear my blue wig all day.
Yes, people at RPC love a costume.
I mean, they do. Now I will say I like this better than the bunny costume that I had for VBS.
That was
Uh,
funny.
but I don't think I can take myself serious
Yes,
in an
yes.
interview and I have to look at myself and that. But I do love the blue wig. But we started out the sermon series with joy, and I preached a sermon on joy, but really kind of foreshadowed into sadness about how they really go hand in hand. And we realized that in the movie at the end, which you referenced this week, about um you know joy, realizing that joy, some of these core memories came from sadness. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of joy and sadness, and how do you feel like they they work together?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie. It's great to see you again. And you preached a magnificent sermon a couple weeks ago. Um, So folks know, one of the things we try to do in the summer is we ask the children's ministry to kind of come up with the sermon series
Mhm.
theme, and they kind of come up with a skeleton of what they want the summer to look like, a curriculum that they have. And so I worked with Sarah Hammond and you and Emily Kemp to kind of Ashley Perry to think about, okay, what do we want to focus in on this summer? And we thought, I think the Psalms are really great to focus in on because they're discrete for each Sunday. So you don't,
Mhm.
because so many people are traveling and miss a Sunday. So you don't really want to rely on a sermon that's going to rely on previous Sundays that people are going to have to have heard to understand this one. And so they're really meant to be standalone. And that's why we thought Inside Out was such and actually I didn't really appreciate it till getting into sadness. What a insightful, thoughtful movie it is,
Yeah.
and how much sense it makes, and really like how clever it is. And so we thought it would be a fun way to pair up those emotions featured in the movie with various psalms that express those emotions. And what I'm
Mhm.
hoping is that we'll study psalms that people maybe have read once or twice but are fairly unfamiliar with, so that they can kind of put them in their back pocket for times of sadness, times
Mhm.
of joy, times of anger. And they can use those prayers in their relationship with God, and then find those emotions when they're negative to be transformed in ways that only God can transform. And so that's kind of the conceit of the series. And so far after two Sundays, it's gone, I think, quite well. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. Um, Now, when it comes to joy and sadness, I think you did a great job of distinguishing joy from happiness. And I
Mhm.
think joy is rooted, we might say it's a theological virtue, in that it's rooted in God, and
Mhm.
that um, it's not pushed to and fro like on a sea of I'm up, I'm down, I'm up, I'm down, but it's rooted in God. And so that even when that I experience sadness, anger, frustration, there can be joy underneath it that sustains us because it's rooted in what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. How
Yeah.
do you conceive of joy?
I really that we really do have to distinguish it from happy and just a circumstance based. It's not
Yeah.
circumstance based. It's much deeper than that. So it's despite the circumstances. And in fact, the psalm that we looked at 2 weeks ago for joy was Psalm 84, and it is a psalm of joy. But it actually talks about the desert of Baca, and which is this, desolate land that they've got to journey through. And
Mhm.
so, even in the midst of this psalm of joy, there was joy there, but it doesn't mean that there is no desolate, barren lands, kind of dry, tear soaked places. But it's God with us on that journey. It's God sustaining us, like you said, that's where the joy comes from. It's
Yes.
it's
And I
not the
think like,
circumstance.
yeah, absolutely. And I think like, think of it like happiness is really determined by external forces.
Right.
I won the game. My team won. It's my birthday. These
Right.
joyful times that are externally derived, and that's not bad. Happiness is great. I hope people
Yeah,
are happier than
absolutely.
than they are sad. But joy is internal, and that it's rooted in God and what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, and therefore is not externally determined. And I thought you did a great job.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is important to note too when we're talking about joy is when we have that intrinsic joy that is found from God, who is our sustainer, who is our comforter, who gives us peace that surpasses understanding. It doesn't take away from the other emotions, right? It
Mm,
doesn't mean that we don't have those, that we can have joy in the midst of sorrow, which sounds weird. But again, it's this deep sustaining thing. And we've talked about joy doesn't trump sadness or
hmm
fear or whatever. It is, we have those things for a reason. And I think sometimes we want to skip some of those other things that are harder
hmm
because they're not happy.
Yeah.
They're not happy things. And we'd like to skip or and make it happy, but there's sadness like you talked about this week. I mean, there is a place for that, and
hmm
sometimes it's important that we acknowledge it and sit in it, because those emotions, I mean, I think I've said, I don't know, this wasn't in the sermon. In fact, it was a funeral that I did this week. I was talking about um, deep grief also comes from deep love.
Mm,
And there's, and knowing that sometimes when we're grieving things, it's because there was something that was so good. And and that's what we were talking about at this particular funeral. And so there's still joy in that, but we've got to sit in this grief and sadness because it's there and it's real. And it's just like Paul says in Thessalonians, it's not that we're not supposed to grieve, but we don't grieve as those who have no hope. And I
right.
think that's where our joy comes from, is in that hope of Christ.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like when it comes to sadness, one of the things I touched on a little bit with and I've honestly been thinking a lot about it after Sunday is that sadness and grief is not like like sometimes we conceive of it as a journey.
Mm.
And when we think of it with that metaphor, it's like I start in sadness and then I'm going to get to happiness or
Right.
relief or peace or whatever. And all I got to do is the right things to get there.
Mm.
And so a lot of people like they're in sadness and they're like, well, I've got to hurry up through my sadness so I can get to the other side. And I think the problem with thinking about sadness that way is that we don't give it its time. And therefore we never fully kind of digest it in a way and let it work through us. And that emotion, we really feel it and we try to rush through it. But then we sublimate it, we push it down, and then we think we're done with it. And then it comes back up in unhealthy ways, right?
Mhm.
I think we probably both have examples, other people, but also ourselves, that I mean, I think of times like I'm like, whoa, I haven't truly grieved what I went through, what
Hmm.
happened to me. And I need to revisit that and just be and let myself be sad about it because that's it. And I don't know when that sadness is going to fully be digested. I don't know when I will step out on the other side or step out of it, but it's got to do its work on me. And I think
Hmm.
conceiving it not as a process, but as kind of a state or a place to inhabit allows it to fully work through us and allows us to be a full human being in the midst of it. Do you think
Yeah,
that?
I really do. And I think because it almost, if you feel like you've got to get to the other side, it almost makes it feel like it is a hard thing, but it is not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
And it doesn't feel good. So sometimes we can make it feel like we want to get through the bad stuff to get to the good stuff, but it's hard, but it's a process. And there's some sadness or grief that doesn't ever it's not going to go away. We're still going to be sad about something. It might look different because we are digesting it in different ways and experiencing new things and working through it. So it might look
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say, it's not just this thing we've got to get to the other side and think we're going to be done with it. Because I just don't think I agree with you. I don't think it works that way. Tell me, because one of the things in your sermon this Sunday, you acknowledged that you had grown up, as many people do, like, oh, well, I'm going to be tough. I'm not going to be sad. I'm not going to cry. And then you went through this time in seminary where you were going to make yourself cry, and you watched The Notebook, and ugly cried. But tell me about your own journey with sadness and kind of leaning into being okay to feel that way, because I really appreciated you were very vulnerable and shared some of your story, um with your family and things, that are hard and sad. what is
Mhm.
what is your personal journey with sadness? How has it changed through the years?
Well, I think first, I've become much more comfortable with that emotion and being in that place. I don't know if it's a like a Northwest thing, a Montana thing, or they're just kind of like people that grew up in the Depression that really had hard, difficult times. Um, you know, and for various reasons, the breakdown of family, death of loved ones, that you kind of had to suck it up and just
Mhm.
muscle through it. And there are times that we have to do that. I mean, you're sad and you got to go to your job. You're
Yeah.
sad. You got to make sure your kids are fed. Like you got to do the yard work. There's things, but internally, are you in touch with that sadness in the midst of it? And so I think I got and I honestly I've done a lot of therapy. Coming out of the pandemic, I was in a bad way, like emotionally, all the stuff that was happening with my father. Um, I'm an extrovert, so sitting at home with two people, one of them a 1-year-old, was just not exactly a joy-filled time. And I
Hmm.
think, and my wife, was like, you need to go talk to somebody. And I think the role of our community, whether that's our family, whether that's our church family, coworkers, friends, they can help us let us know that we're not alone and they help us journey through it. Because I think one of the things about sadness, the unhealthy ways we deal with it, is we self-isolate
Hmm.
and we retreat into the shadows. We push people away when we really need to be welcoming people in and and not to fix us or figure it out, but just to put their arms around our shoulders and say, "Hey, I'm with you in this.
Hmm.
I feel you. And they honor our emotions. And some of us are really scared about that because we're like, I don't want to admit I'm sad. I don't want to get in touch with that emotion. I don't, I'm scared. And somebody else can give us courage uh and comfort in the midst of that. And
Yeah.
what do you think? Like, I was thinking, like, what are some of the church's ministries that help us in times of sadness?
So that's what I was actually just thinking about too, because I love that you talked about, you were talking to your wife about it, you're talking to Courtney, and she's encouraging you, you got to go talk to someone. So I think, therapy and there's so many tools that we can have. It's not just one thing, but inviting people into that. And I was thinking about that, some of the tools that we have at church is just being in community and praying with and for each other, just being there. But we
Mhm.
have our Stephen ministry, which is such a fabulous ministry. If people don't know, I oftentimes people don't necessarily know the story of Stephen in the Bible, so they don't exactly understand what this ministry is.
Right.
But it is someone who has been, it's a lay leader in the church that has been through a lot of training on being with people in times of need. And it's someone that is a confidential person to walk with you in a hard time where you may have friends and family and a therapist, but this is a caring Christian friend that is going to just be with you on the journey. And we always say we're not caregivers. Stephen ministers aren't caregivers. That's God's job. We're not God, but we are caregivers, and it's a way to give care to folks. And in fact, a lot of our Stephen ministers have been on the other side before, and received that care, and it's been so powerful that they want to share that. And we have our prayers and squares ministry and our prayer shawl ministry that literally we'll make these beautiful quilts and shawls and pray for people going through these times and then give them this blanket or this shawl so that our church family can know, you're going through this hard time. You can literally be covered in the prayers of your community. And there's lots of other ways, but I think that those are some where I really see our congregation stepping up and saying, we're here and we're with you. And
Yes.
I talked about this in my sermon. It's easy for me to give care. I want to care for others. If I'm being honest, it's really hard for me to ask for that.
Hmm.
And that's something I've really needed to work on too. Like, yeah, I need to go talk to somebody or I need to let people in. And it truly is, when I do that, I'm so glad, and it's a healthy thing to do. And so I think it's important for folks to say, you know what, it's okay for me to not retreat, but
Right.
to let people in.
Totally agree. I was thinking a couple weeks ago, a woman kind of sheepishly came up to me after service and said, "Hey, could I come talk to you?" And I had no idea about what. And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's just make time." And so she came into my office. I said, "What's going on?" She's like, "Well, my dad died, and I just can't get out. I'm grieving. I'm so sad. I loved him so much. I miss him so much." And she was almost embarrassed by the level of grief. And then I asked her, I said, "Well, how long ago did your dad die?" And she was like, "4 months ago." I was like, "My goodness, how long did you spend? You spent, 45 years with him. Like, four
Yeah,
months? You're going to be grieving, sister.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
it's okay." And she almost had a level of embarrassment
yeah,
about her grief. And I hope I was able to give her permission to
yes,
sit in that grief, and that's okay. And we don't know. Grief is a mystery. Like, some
right,
people, it's shorter, sometimes it's longer.
right.
And but we've got to let it do its work on us. And I think one of our roles, Carrie, as pastors, is sometimes giving people permission to grieve, to be open and honest about it in a safe, confidential way, like these
Yes.
Stephen ministers, to
Mhm.
just listen. And that's one of the great honors of my job and calling, and I'm sure it is for you, is to sit with people in
Absolutely.
that grief and give them permission and let them know that they're not alone. We're with them.
Yeah, and it's not something to fix. Like we feel like, again, as you
Right.
talked about before, like, oh, well, sometimes we give ourselves these self-imposed timelines, like, well, I need
Yes.
to get over it by this time. And that's just that's that's not true. And so and we can sit in that and sit with others. And I think it is a great honor to be able when someone invites you in or you invite somebody in to just sit with you in that.
Yes.
And that's the thing. We're called to be in community and we were made to know and be known. And so
Yes.
that I think that that's important. We were never meant to do this alone. So
Yes.
this weekend, this Sunday, we are moving on to a new emotion. You're going to be preaching on fear.
That's right.
Can you give us any? Are you fearful about your?
Well, yeah, no, not really.
Yeah.
I'm excited because I think fear is one of those emotions that people feel a lot, and it really plagues a lot of people, and they don't know what to do. And so we're going to think through kind of concretely what are some things we can do in dealing with fear, and how do we distinguish between healthy fear and what we might call toxic fear.
Right.
The fear, there's like my kid, I want my kids to be fearful about running into the street and that they look both ways before they go. And the
Mhm.
1 year old not to go into the street. Um, but there's toxic fear that prevents us. If I get so debilitated by fear um, before a Sunday sermon, that's going to prevent me from doing what I'm called to do.
Right.
And so I've got to figure out a way to deal with that fear.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the issues we're going to wrestle with. And I hope they're practically helpful for folks as they encounter fear, because we all are going to fear at some point in our lives.
Totally agree. I'm really looking forward to it. So, looking forward to that. We're going to talk about fear this coming Sunday. Jeff, thanks so much for being here today. It was so good to talk through this with you.
Always good to talk to you, Carrie. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Sounds good. Bye bye.
Bye bye.